Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'd like to call to order the January 14th, 2026 budget submeeting. We will start with grants and gifts.
Thank you, Danielle. I'll pick it over to Assistant Superintendent Lindsay Fratt to talk about our history grant.
Thanks, Brian. So Liz, Mari, and Christina Melanson, our curriculum coordinators, have applied for a grant through DESE for a history curriculum called Investigating History. So it would be grades 5 through 7. It's a really high quality history program for 5th through the middle school. In 8th grade, it switches to more of a civics-based program that we're hoping at some point we're able to apply for as well. So it includes free curriculum, free coaching for teachers who are participating, and free professional development. So we've expressed our initial interest and moved on to the second round. So they'll be doing interviews with principals and teacher participants in February. So we're keep everybody posted on how that goes, but we're hopeful that it would be a really great resource for students and teachers.
Would it be a reoccurring grant that you'd reapply for, or is it?
I believe it's 3 years.
Okay. Any questions from the committee on that?
Thanks, Lindsay. No questions? So the next item under grants and gifts is the Allison from the Allison Trust. We talked about this last meeting. Town council met and they voted on November 24th. They heard it, referred it to budget management, and then December 15th they met again. So they voted to accept the gift and create the account. So the town accountant has created the gift accounts for us, and now we will be receiving 2 checks totaling $100,000, which will be for scholarships at the high school. And the intent of the gift was based on CTE students are going on to further their education or their skill, and also for students who are going on to higher ed with any sort of focus in music. So I guess our Principal Monahan here. So as those checks come in, we'll get them deposited into that account. Next step for the committee would be to vote to accept the gift, so we can put this on for the next school committee.
Full school committee meeting?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
And for the scholarship, is that gonna go directly through the high school, or who is that gonna go through? And they would apply through the high school.
So we'll work with Principal Monahan on setting up that grant.
Okay.
The typical
Process.
the typical process they have a number of scholarships at the high school already.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Moving on.
Moving on to, I guess we can go on to athletic sponsorship program. The only update there is we're keeping this on as a standing item because it's new this year. So the only update there is, I think we're at roughly $38,000.
$38,300.
$38,300. Wonderful. Any questions on that?
I do not. Do you? Does anybody else have any questions on that? Thank you for that update and keeping it on the agenda too.
Yeah, the screen here for those who are on watching. Now we're on to under auditor reports. We went through an audit of through DESE of our Title II, Title III, ESSER 3 FY24 expenditures. I believe that brings us to the end of ESSER. I think we've been audited 3 or 4 times for ESSER. But the review focused on internal controls and financial management and grant compliance to ensure the district has written procedures for managing federal grants and the expenditures that are allowable, properly documented in compliance. So based on their review, they did not have any findings related to those 3 grants. That's good news.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Okay, and then
Not to contracts.
still under reports. So we did. This is a report from last committee meeting. We had that's brought up again Newton. So we looked into what Newton had done with their transportation. It did spur another conversation, which was very helpful to us. But in terms of what Newton did, it wouldn't apply in Weymouth. Basically, so private schools under the law afforded the same opportunity as public school when it comes to transportation. So in Newton, they decided to reduce the level of service they were giving the parochials for transportation. So Newton is allowed to restrict private school busing within zones. They were doing it for the public schools, not the parochial schools. So what's the best example I can give is if we were busing kids in Weymouth and we were only busing within their district, their school district, that's what Newton was doing. They were only busing public schools within like their neighborhood school area, except the parochial schools, they were allowing students to be bused all over Newton. So if they're in Newton, they want to go to school in West Newton. So the committee decided to reduce back to what they were doing for the public school. So it wouldn't apply here because we're already doing what's equal for Weymouth Public Schools. It was a big deal up there. And the law, actually so Newton is allowed to restrict private school busing to within zones of districts because the state law says that the standards for busing private and public schools must be equal. So again, basically, they were doing more for the parochial and they just brought it back down to level. But that spurred some conversations with transportation, and Faith is talking with the parochial. So we do currently provide 2 of our first student buses for the parochial runs. And we're gonna roll those back into our complete route for the public. And we have our 2 internal buses and drivers that will do the 2 parochial routes. So to the parochials, it'll be seamless. They're still getting busing. They're still getting, whether that's St. Jerome's or Sacred Heart. But we're just gonna use our internal buses rather than the first student contract. First student contract buses are quite expensive, about $90,000.
But that doesn't decrease our costs at all.
No, it doesn't increase.
Just budget.
It shifted. So it's shifts more of the funding back to
In
first student contract for our 30 buses.
Good, that makes sense.
But I thought it was important to follow up on that because it was a good.
I'm looking, do you have a question?
Want me to come up there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Discriminates against tall people. Thanks. Thanks for the update, Brian. It was an interesting update, but just to be clear then, so the conversation did spur the reduction of 2 buses, each one of which costs 90,000?
Shifting them back to so all 30 are now, it's part of our routing and scheduling of all of our primaries, middle and high school. We still need to provide transportation, so we're using our internal.
But as opposed to paying for a student for doing it. So what was the savings?
It's significant because we're using our own buses,
right,
our drivers. The only implication is that it could reduce. We might have to when it comes to field trips, we the morning field trips, so we'll have to use first student more for field trips.
Okay, but it does save some money in terms of.
It's an allocation, so it's not.
Okay, an internal shift. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for the update. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee for the date? The contracts and procurement?
Contracts and procurement. Speaking of transportation, we have a 5-year contract with first student is up this year. So we will be to bid. And we'll be in front of council on the 20th, next Tuesday. This is to allow for the 5-year, we talked about this last meeting, allow for up to 5-year. State law is 3 years, but we're looking to get the extension of, potentially 2 more years. So once council votes that, if they vote favorably, then Alyssa can begin the process to do a RFP or
RFP?
Yeah.
Is an RFP?
IRB.
invitation for bid.
Okay. Any questions from the people?
So more to come on the big yellow bus contract.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to fiscal year 27. What do you have?
One.
Sorry.
It's an update, on our state earmark, the fair share earmark,
Yeah.
free period, $750,000. So that's all been expended, Alyssa?
Mhm.
Excellent. And the benefit to the town is that it was able to cover some administrative costs, which include costs. I want to thank Gina, because Gina was very involved in that process of, getting the products and getting them distributed across the state, working with Kenzie, from what organization is she from?
Free
period.
period, but
Period.
same vehicles are charged to, yes. Yep.
I can't remember who I was talking to, but they gave, well, it was another school district. They were really impressed with the supplies that were ordered too. It was really helpful. So
Yeah, there are a few schools have already made some orders. We've got a big order.
they're really thankful about
Plenty
it.
more around, so if you need any, let me know.
I think it must have been Whitman Hanson that I was talking to. So
I mean, it was almost 3 million products. 370 schools, I think.
and it's a
So-
worry taken away from our kids that don't have
It was
to
really impressive.
panic about it.
Now on to.
You don't want to talk about bakery.
Learn. I have Alyssa.
Right.
Moving right along. Why am I here? FY 27 budget planning. So just as we start to talk about the FY 27 budget, I guess it's timely. We got a report from the IG's office, and basically they revisited the issue with Brockton a couple of years ago. They talked about Whitman Hanson. So the IG's office did a follow-up investigation interview, and then they issued a bulletin it's a public document. It's in the IG's quarterly bulletin, and they talked a lot about sound budget practices. So in terms of just kind of setting the stage for the next couple of meetings, it's good for us to revisit, how we as administration under Mel's leadership approach the budget. They talk a lot about establishing tone from the top. So it's, Mel, the executive team, Alyssa has a huge part of it, working with school committee, working with all of our administrators, our buildings, our staff in the mayor's office. They talk a lot about strengthening financial controls, which I think this team has done a great job the last few years. We've brought in Jeremy in the HR role, which is the collaboration between Jeremy and Alyssa on just knowing down to the penny our staff, and just knowing our expenses down to the penny has been huge. And then it touches on establishing realistic budget projections, which we're going to get into near the end when we talk about our 3 scenarios, because we have made an adjustment, and we'll talk about what that adjustment is and why we're making that adjustment, because we're basing our projections on realistic information and historical data. So as we look at going into the budget process, we constantly turn to Kelly Powers to make us better when it comes to communication. So she has updated, and for those who can see at home, so this is our website, and there's 2 paths to get there, but a lot of the documents we're talking about. So if you can go to departments, finance and operations, and then you can go to FY 27 budget development. So this brings you to some links that I think are crucial throughout the process. So again, there's 2 ways to get there, whether it's through the school committee budget sub page or through our finance and operations page. It brings you these links, and these are links that you're going to want to follow throughout the year. So our 3 budget scenarios, which we'll talk about, our schedule, and then as we're going through the budget process this year, any other documents we seem valuable to have a very forward-facing view, we will put on this page. As is always the case, all of our agendas, all of our materials are available, but it's come up in the last couple of meetings about, when we look at establishing documents for budget process, executive summary is key. That forecast of the 3 budgets, that's looked at as like our executive summary. And then we have our department narratives. We're constantly doing the forecasting and projecting. And then, like I said, visual tables, any sort of organization of information. You'll want to go to this page that Kelly has created. And again, you can go through the school committee page, through budget sub to FY 27 budget development, or you can go through the finance operations. Either way, it's gonna bring you here. So just wanted to share that as we start to kick off the official budget season.
That's great. And I thank Kelly for all the, I know it's not easy work and we're always asking her for something. So I appreciate her work that she's put into it.
Did Tracy get on?
Nice.
Did you see Tracy?
Can you see if Tracy's on?
Can I see if Tracy's on?
She texted me and she couldn't get on.
Did we lose it?
This is 12 people.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, she's on. She's good.
Oh, good. Perfect. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Now I've lost it. Now I've lost everything.
Just let Alyssa do it.
I think if you just minimize up anyway, it should be.
There it is.
There we go.
I think you have to close that out to screen share again. The bottom thing that's, yeah.
All right, well, now we need to share for, so now we're gonna go into fees. I apologize for the screen. So this information is available. Anyone who's got a packet, so we can touch on fee.
Does everybody have a packet? If they, but I can take mine.
There's still some at the end of the table.
So each year we do review. And typically we increase fees for cost of running the program. So for our preschool, we'll increase fees to cover the cost of staff increases, the cost, transportation. We look at our first student contract, we'll increase fees based on that. What we're doing here first is more about balancing the budget. We've talked about cuts, and when you have a shortfall of a budget, you can decrease your expenses or you can increase revenues. So that's the exercise we're talking about tonight is taking an approach with our fees, a drastic approach of increasing 10, 20, or 30%. So this is the beginning of the conversation throughout the budget season. We will revisit fees several times. We'll get into specific fees, but what we wanted to share with the committee and the public tonight is when we talk about our fees, we have our fees for, athletics, for buses. We're proposing adding a couple fees. One is potentially a non-refundable deposit for our bus. So basically our bus fee of $265. There'd be upfront deposit of $25 that would go towards that balance. We're looking at potentially adding, which we'll talk about when we get into the high school presentation next week or the week after, proposing maybe some new fees at the high school. But in general, what we want to talk about tonight is the proposal and the impact of doing a 10, 20, and 30% increase in our fees. We have increased our fees over the years. A lot of districts took this action last year, drastic. If we look at our comps. So that first page is really just the fees with the proposed increases and what it looks like to increase. So for example, athletics, football is currently $250. When you do a 10, 20, and 30% increase, you're looking at $275, $300, and $325. The next section is we just looked at some of our comparable districts around. And so I'm not going to go through this in detail. It's there for folks to review. But when you look at some of our districts around us, Hanover, Hingham, Marshfield, you'll see their fees. So you can do a good comparison of what our fees are, what we're proposing, and what our comparable districts look like. The last page is where I want to focus our attention for tonight on. And what is the impact? So you raise fees, I think you're going to get a certain dollar amount. So we did an analysis of our fees. So these are our fees that we currently charge for evening high school. We have childcare at the high school, our athletic fees. We have our building usage fees, summer school, pre-K. our bus fees and our student parking. We looked back the last 3 years to see what we collected. We had to take out 20 and 21. 22 was lagging too. But when I look at the last 3 years and I compare it to years past, we're pretty much in line. But I want to take an average of those 3 years. And then what we do is we just project what a 10, 20, and 30% increase on the revenues would be. Now, you get a gross number because you're increasing incrementally these averages, but you have to account for, like I mentioned earlier, when we increase our fees, it's typically to cover the increase in costs. So when you subtract out the costs of, our first student contract goes up by X%, so we raise our fees by X%. If we do a 30% increase, some of that increase is going to go towards that contractual increase. So what we are left with is, if we were to raise all of our fees 10, 20, or 30%, we believe we would yield these amounts here. Even if we go with the middle, if it was 20% increase on fees, we would yield roughly $250,000. What does that mean? That means that's $250,000 less we would have to cut in expenses. That's $250,000 less in jobs we'd have to cut, to give you an example specifically. So that's what we wanted to present tonight for the committee and the public to see. That over the next couple meetings, we're going to talk about fees, and we will, as we budget and address our shortfall, we're going to factor in some sort of fee increase. Anything else?
Thank you, Brian, Alyssa, for all this analysis. And I thank all of you for being here. I know there's a lot of people at home watching as well. Like Brian had said, this is the beginning, right? So we're responding to what you've been asking for, which is transparency. And we're getting better at the work we do. We're being transparent about it, right? So if we're thinking in our heads 10, 20, 30, we don't know where we are, but we're going to tell you what 10, 20, and 30 looks like for families. So we're so early in this marathon, right? So we want to encourage people to participate, but also remember that it's a long process, and it is our jobs to kind of hold the ship, to keep everybody with that steady mind. Nothing is drastically happening tomorrow, but it's just, you'll continue to get more and more information as Brian, Alyssa, and the executive team as we talk. So we're at the early stages of all this, but I can't thank them enough for providing what I think is great visuals so that people feel like they're informed. And each time we come to Budget Sub, there might be something new that we're presenting, but we are trying to lead you through our thought process as we go through it this year.
Thanks, Mel. So we're not asking the committee to take any action tonight. Or share this information with the committee, digest it, think about it, and as we have subsequent budget sub part of the conversation, and as we do every year, we will bring the fees individually back to the committee and talk about proposed increases. But this is also part of that conversation now.
I think you said it's the start of looking at everything. We have to look at everything. It's unfortunately, that's the realization we're in. We have to look at every single thing. Any questions, comments from the committee? Let me open it up to the committee first, and then I'll open up to the public. No?
I just have one question. On average, what is the percentage annually that the fees typically go up?
A good average, I would say, is 2.5%, 2.5% to 5%.
Okay.
We've tried our best. We've got a process now. Where we review all of them every year. We're on this weird cycle, and the best example I give you is like our lunch. When we were charging for lunch, we'd have to increase each year because of the rate that the Fed set. And so we just got in the habit of now we just review them all. We try not to increase them, but a lot of our programming and activities are driven by its staff. So we have to factor in the staff costs there. And the fees don't cover all of the activity. Best example is athletics. So we charge a user fee for athletics, covers the buses, covers the rink, the pool, uniforms, refs, coaches, covers all these expenses, but it's not the true cost of athletics.
Right.
We budget in our operating budget, I think like $1 million. So it just supplements. So we try our best not to raise fees, but unfortunately we do. But to answer your questions, it's not as drastic as 10, 20, and 30. It's usually 2.5, 3, 4.
Any other questions from the committee before I open it up to the public? Come on up, Kim.
I just had a question because I didn't see it on here and it's probably something I should know, but what are the fees in regards to the other spaces in the school building, such as auditoriums?
Second page has of the fees. Let me bring it back up here. You can see the and
It has the gyms, but it doesn't have the auditorium.
What is that?
so the auditorium, Chapman, for example, that is, so Donnie Norton manages that space. We charge him our custodial rate, and so he manages, so that's a town rate that's issued for that space.
So we don't set that rate.
No, we collaborate with him, but it's not part of our school rates. He manages that space. That's through the, we had a MOA several years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
To manage that space. It's amazing space, but it's not something that's in the scope of what maintenance can handle, like even the technical components and the booking people and managing the space. So it's a rate that's set through his office, and then we ensure that we get our costs back for custodial rate. We talk about the overhead for electricity, but they set the rate in collaboration with us.
Same with the planetarium? It's the
Correct.
same?
The auditoriums and the planetarium.
Okay. Go ahead, guys.
Thanks again. Thank you. Just a general comment. For those people that are new to this whole process, the level of transparency, communication, responsiveness is a completely different universe in a positive way, compared to what things have been in the past. So I say it all the time, but I'll say it again because there's a lot of new people here. The kudos that your entire team deserves around not just fiscal management, so we'll never be in a Brockton situation or a Whitman Hanson situation, but the preparation of documentation, the availability of documentation is just a completely different universe. And I say that in a positive way. You know, it's tremendous to see that kind of effort, effective effort. On the fees, you know, I have to talk about athletics. I don't believe in pay to play, but I'm not going to say the same things that I've said in years past, recognizing the cliff that we're looking at in terms of a $4 million potential shortfall. So I recognize the need for that. However, not just for athletics, but for fees in general, I would encourage you to leave that as a last step, right? First, you need to go through whatever either other revenue exercises or cost-cutting exercises before you get to this particular step, and meaning fees overall, not just athletics. But in terms of the athletics piece, I would also like to see some equity. If athletic fees are going to increase, then you should take a look at increasing fees for extracurriculars in general. There's a cost associated with the photography club, with all of the other extracurriculars, stipend. Was it there? I missed it.
They're here.
Okay, great. Then I apologize for missing that, but I'm glad that they're there. I'm glad that you had the forethought to include that equity component in it as well. And then finally, I'm also a big believer in comparisons, but when you're taking a look at the fees that are charged by other districts, I don't think Hingham is a good comparison. I think you need to factor economic issues and look at other DART districts. I know you look at one, but in terms of economics, fiscal capacities, student numbers that would be on free and reduced free lunch, the other metrics that you use about economic indicators in Weymouth, I think you need to look at, if you're going to do comparisons, you need to not look at the rich neighbors around us. You need to take a look at ones that are more fiscally similar. You may recall as I sent you some documentation that, by way of example, Weymouth now qualifies to get on the gateway city list, and one of those drivers is economics. So I would just encourage you to take a look at comparisons on more similar districts than the rich ones around us. Thank you.
Is there somebody else that wanted to?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I'm still at elementary level, so I just had a quick question. Does the middle school have to pay for sports? Like, I just saw that the high school was itemized, but I didn't know if middle school had any fees.
Currently not yet. It's
Okay.
budgeted.
Is it something that, not that I'm all for the fees, but money's money?
Is it something that we could entertain and charge?
Maybe just look at?
Something we can look at?
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, no. Anybody else?
So again, we'll bring this back in, and I apologize, the scan.
Yeah, it
Some
didn't
of the
highlight.
highlight of the new, but there was several new, I can read them right here. It was, I mentioned the deposit for transportation, clubs and activities, theater, and then, two new rates. As folks noticed tonight, we had some of our basketball in here. Two new rates for our gyms when it's Weymouth Youth Leagues. So it's a new rate, for Weymouth Youth Leagues. JBL, Weymouth Girls, Soccer have used our gym, so those are the new rates, and they'll be better highlighted in the, going forward in the documents.
Can I ask
Mhm.
why there's a separate? Like, are they categorized differently? Like how?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's Weymouth Youth, it's our kids, and then we have a non-for-profit, could be anyone
Right.
outside of
Aren't
Weymouth.
they a non-for-profit?
They are, but they're also are. So we looked at it as, we have for-profit, we have non-for-profit, but that's like a non-for-profit group that's not a Weymouth group. We acknowledge that it's our, and we've had great conversations with JBL,
Yep.
Weymouth Girls, and other Weymouth sports, and it's like, it's our kids.
Yeah, that
you
makes
know?
sense. Yeah.
Yep. So we at least want to cover our costs.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Do you want to move on to the 10-year operating plan, please?
Yes. Let me go one step. We have our 10-year. So we have our 10-year history. And so we look at history, then we look at forecasts. Our forecast briefly. So this is our forecast for what we forecasted for, when we talked about this last year, we're seeing like a 3.8.
Mhm.
And it's no coincidence that we've pretty much been living on 3.8s to 4s the last 10, 11 years. So then we get into projections. We'll talk about our scenarios. But just in terms of our 10-year history, so we've tracked over time, budgets since just before I arrived, right around here. And just looking at the funding increases, what the percent increases are or were. This 1%, that year makes, remember, that's the COVID year. So it was a 1% increase that year. But it's really been, over the years, it's averaged around 3.8 to 4. And that's what we see in our forecast. So and we can talk about the reasons why, but it's, we look at staffing. We've showed this before where, I see our enrollments going down over that 10-year period. We leveled out here. We've actually begun to grow slightly. And then you see our staffing levels going up. But it's something that we've really honed in on the last couple of years is we build budgets. We talk about this all the time. We're building a budget now for next September, right? What's going to happen between now and next September? So we build a budget for next September. We go through the state, the local process. We get it approved in March, June, May, June. And then life happens. People leave, people come, people go. We have student needs that come up. And so we have to add positions, but they're not budgeted. So if we deem them necessary compliance wise, we add these positions. And we've had the luxury of, a lot of these years was, Gus has talked a lot about the Chapter 70 net school spending. So a lot of these years was catch up to our budget. And then we had years where we had new growth in revenue. And then we had years where we had ESSER money. I mean, look at this ESSER year, 40 positions. So even in the years we've cut, right? So we've cut the last 2 years, we're still netting, we're adding positions because things happen and we need to be able to add positions. The unfortunate part is we've depleted a lot of our reserve funds to help with that. And so I just thought it's worth noting that we're going to talk about cuts again for next year. We've talked about cuts this year. We talked about cuts last year. But we still have to add positions for certain needs. And that's evident here when you look at this graph. So that's our 10-year history. We just want to show folks where we've been and in the funding we've received. We had a great meet at the mayor's office the other day, just kind of, we brought this to their attention too, so they're aware of the history going back. And so that's the 10-year history.
For the, can you scroll up a little bit?
Yeah.
For the other of the 5% increase, that's not including ESSER funds, right? Or did that include ESSER funds and then the positions for the next year?
So this is operating,
That's operating.
right?
really.
So this is the 5% is truly an operating increase.
Okay.
And if you go back to those meetings, it was to make up for,
Oh, that's right.
it was to help with
Yep.
this 1%.
Okay.
It was.
That was when we settled.
Yeah.
That
So
year.
it's at 1%, we hit the 1%, so we got a little more than typical to offset that. And that's, that's kind of what we're hearing now is, we're looking at potentially two very tough years, and we'll see where we go in the future here.
And we always say like the 40 that were added through the ESSER, that was recovering from a pandemic, right? So it was, now looking back, it's easy to understand. It was never meant to be long-term money.
Right.
But in the moment, you're doing everything you can to address unfinished learning and all of the mental health. And, you're just basically saying, we're going to do what we need to do for our community, never thinking those 40 people have to disappear at some point.
Yeah.
And we've added positions. So it's a little bit of adjustment for that as well.
So that's where we are now. We're gonna get into the scenarios after we go through our initial, we have, 3 meetings of presentations from our departments and our cost centers and our buildings. But, we talk about scenarios. We still have to look at revenue. So when you're talking about expenses and staffing, but we don't know yet what revenues look like from the state or local. The governor looks like pushing out a couple weeks their release of their budget. So we'll talk more about that. But I do want to now turn to our department, our cost center.
The governor was supposed to have their budget out, or budget next week. Push it up.
Okay, so
I can go.
we'll touch on that with timeline. But now let's go back to our departments. We're going to start with thank you for being here, Gina. Thank you for your patience. Before I turn this over to Gina, the approach we've taken is, from the expense standpoint, if we're looking at a 1% budget, we started with, what does a 1% increase in our expenses look like? So we shared that with the principals and the department heads. And as always the case, we allow them to shift between the lines, but we want to give them the autonomy to make sure they have what they need, shift whatever lines they want. But the bottom line is we're looking at all of our expenses to increase by 1% to stay in line with the budget goal that we're developing right now. So I will go to health. So in the packet and in the budget book will be the expense lines. You're welcome to ask questions. But what Gina's going to focus on is staffing she has and any needs that she sees potentially for next year. So I will turn it over to you, Gina.
So with the 1% increase, we can and we will manage this year. My ask is to keep my staff that I have. And I have 19 full-time staff right now. One of them being a one-to-one nurse for one of our one-to-one students. I know there's a one-to-one needs coming in, or actually started, but we will use the nurse we have. We have a district float. We're going to assign her to that to offset the costs.
It's not a full-time student.
Nope. She's right now she's 2 days a week, half days. So it's what do you consider point if that? And I think her needs for next year as of right now is 3 days a week, half days. So 0.4 again, maybe it's not a lot, but so with the, I have a resource nurse and I have two resource nurses, well, 1.5 resource nurse out of the grant. And then I have a district float. So between the 3 of them, we'll manage for 2027. So my ask is to keep my staff, give me the 1% and we'll be fine.
And you can see for health, we're talking a 30,000 budget across the entire district. So we also work with the principals to ensure that if, Gina needs Band-Aids or crackers or something in the building, that the building principal is working with Gina's nurses to make sure that they have everything they need.
Right.
So it's in addition to Gina's specific budget.
Right, and we've talked about that too, about cutting back a little bit on some things, but you're right. Principals most of them help, they'll help out with their budget. Even the food pantry, they help us out with crackers, so there's other resources out there that will be okay.
I'll open up, anybody from the committee, have any questions for Gina? Go.
Well, do we have enough nurses for our population? Are there enough?
We do right now. We do. Oh, we're pretty lucky, to be honest. We got a good staff. The ratio, as you probably know, is 500 to 250 rather than 500 per nurse, and we are covering that right now. Because even at the high school level where there's might be a little bit more students, we have the para as well.
Okay.
So that offsets kind of not having that nurse. Believe me, I'd ask if we need it, but I think we're okay right now as long as we don't lose anyone. That would be tough.
I'll open it up to the public so Gina doesn't have to stay if she needs to leave.
I guess.
You know what I'm gonna ask.
I can imagine.
Comes up every year. Those one-to-one nurses, your 19 FTEs, those one-to-one nurses aren't really counted in the ratio for availability to students overall, right? Since they're attached to a particular student. So my question to you is, I know that there's no regulatory requirements, but there are regulatory suggestions about the ratios. If you exclude the one-to-one nurses who really aren't available to the rest of the student population, what do our ratios look like compared to what the recommended suggestions are?
Well, most of the primary schools have 3-ish to 3-something students. So there's the one nurse in the primaries. The high school has, I want to say, Karen, you can answer me, I want to say 16-ish hundred. So that, and I have 3 nurses there plus a para. So that takes that half nurse that could technically cover the two, because it's 250 to 500. Suggestion, recommended, not required.
250 to 500.
Yeah, so we're good. In the middle school, I believe, has about 1,400 students. We have 3 nurses there as well right now, plus a para.
Okay.
So-
And I would, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I would imagine in some emergency situation, obviously a nurse can go from one school to another as needed. If there was some urgent need, or does that not happen?
It does happen. It is, especially during COVID. It doesn't happen often because I have a good staff and I have the 2 resource nurses, 1.5, and then my district float. So the district float, as we talked about before, I'm often sending her to schools, especially, the last hour of a day when one of the nurses have an emergency at home, like you come over and she does. So we've been very lucky, but yes, Scott, to answer your question, there are times where I'm like, oh my God, who's going to cover? I'll go cover. I've said it.
Yeah, Gina's a fantastic nurse herself.
Thank you. Been doing a long time.
Right. So just to finish, we're doing well, but we're still below the recommended ratios that the state suggests.
Can I just clarify? So Gina, when you were giving the numbers, those are the full-time nurses, like 3 at the high school, 3 at Chapman, but on
Correct.
top of that, you have a float
Yes.
plus a 1.5
resource nurse,
1.6
correct.
plus Gina. So
In terms of how it compares to the state suggested ratios, we're better, but we're still below the suggested numbers, or are we at or above?
okay.
We're at now. Okay. That's great to hear.
Good, yep.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
That's a good.
Does our budget ever provide for nursing?
So the nurses in our budget are ones that are contracted through agencies for out of district,
Gotcha.
just because of the way that with liability and things, our nurses are contracted.
Any other questions from the committee or the public? So Gina can go. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks, Gina.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks for letting me go first. Thank you.
Now we're on to 16 Meg. All right, let me scroll. So for student services, to Megan Christie, while they're talking, I'm gonna bring up our staffing request sheet. So Health was not asking for additional staff. Meg's department's the first one that we're gonna see staffing requests. So we're bringing back our additional staffing request sheet that has our compliance and then our additional considerations. So once I bring that up, she'll talk about the staffing requests and talk about the programs. At a high level with any expenses, we did the 1% rate.
Yeah, I'll just highlight some of the differences. So that first line for contract services, that's primarily where those nurses come in. So the only one in district is a direct hire, and those are the contract nurses for out of district. And then the only other contracted service right now we have is for South Shore Hearing. And that's really consolidated any of our contract services. And that's because we didn't make a full-time position for that South Shore Hearing. So you see, we have a significant increase in those services, which is great. Looking down, there's a little bit of an increase for contract services. Those are things like we use digital assessments. Our psychologists use the WISC and the Woodcock Johnson, and those are all digital. So that falls under a new line where previously they were materials. There's a difference there. We have a little bit of a decrease too under the contract services for psychological evaluations. That's primarily when we have independent evaluations or a bilingual evaluation. We have been able to bring someone on hourly, which now budget. So that's been a savings as well instead of contracting that's for the bilingual assessments. That's been helpful. The majority of this is pretty much the same for the rest of the line items. Our out-of-district tuitions are also relatively the same. We've kept that number stable. Also getting the reimbursement through circuit breaker. Also the numbers for out-of-district, we currently have 75 and 5 that are pending. So we've been hovering in the high 70s over the last few years since I've been in this role. So we've been keeping those numbers consistent. And as you can see, there's more in public placements than private, which is also showing least restrictive and a good move for our kids.
No talk on that there's gonna be a increase to tuition.
They're so
Scare us like last year. Really?
not the 14%.
Yeah.
For number,
Saying 3.04% for OSD. So that's the private tuitions that fall under the OSD rate. There are some schools that are asking for a higher rate because they're doing improvements within the building. So we factored all of those potential increases into the out of district if those are approved. And we don't know all of the rates for the public collaboratives at this point, but we factored in the same 3.04% because I think that's what we're hearing from like South Shore Collaborative, that it will likely be in that range. We don't expect anything significant.
yeah, we're hopeful the 3.04. We've heard talk, the Inspector General is looking at transportation as a whole across the state, and the pricing and the cost that it is, making sure vendors are not escalating costs unnecessarily. So as we learn
During
more,
COVID, a lot of these little transportation companies.
correct.
starting and-
You could see a 200-300 a day transportation cost.
This line down at the bottom, the tuition to mass schools. So we do have 4 students that attend a different district for special education programming. One is in a post-grad. And then we did have siblings that moved in from a local district and we kept them at that school for their special education services. So there's an increase in that area. But again, overall, the numbers are flush with out of district and they're included in the total out of district students.
That's this line here, Meg?
That's a huge.
Yeah.
And that's,
Huge number.
so
Yeah.
that's legally. We have to do that legally, correct?
So,
Or is it?
so this is 3 of the students are in that Quincy program. So Quincy does have a new program. It is considered a public separate day. It's not considered substantially separate. So those students were doing very well in that program. So we made the decision to keep them, that it wasn't appropriate to bring them back into one of our programs, given they were already in a public separate day versus sending them, say, to the collaborative and switching the programming.
In those cases, would that have been the case? We probably would have seen that student go to another district.
Correct. So on their placement,
Basically would have been a different.
it just would have been a different out of district. So on their placement, the way the Quincy program has done it, it's when a student goes to say South Shore Collaborative, it's listed as a public separate day, meaning it's not within our public school. It's a whole separate location. That's what the Quincy program is.
So really, we would have been needing that cost anyways. It just would have been.
Somewhere else. We just would have moved. Yeah. So that's why there's a dramatic increase in that one.
So does that include like transportation to get there? Everything?
Correct.
Okay. That cost includes the trip.
This fee doesn't include transportation. That'll come up in the transportation budget, the out of district. So these numbers for out of district are purely for the tuition and related expenses. If the student has a one-to-one para, that's all included in that tuition amount.
OTPG speech.
Yeah, that's all.
Any questions from the committee?
Now we'll go to staffing. I'll bring up a sheet here.
Oh, you wanted her to go over stuff?
Um, so this is the document we used last year. You see some items on here that were carried over from last year. So when you look and folks compare to last year, so we took off what we actually funded. And we have what remains is what the requests are. And so if you recall from last year, we had, assistant principals, they still remain on this future considerations list. Over here is the compliance, right? So we'll be going through all the schools as they come to the next couple meetings, but for purposes of today, Meg is going to focus on this district because within special ed, these positions, they'll live in the district lines versus like the individual school lines. So if you want to touch on the STEM teachers are still on here as a district, that was from last year. But if you want to talk about these other positions, Meg, that'd be great.
So I know I came to a budget sub recently and talked about how we added a float ABA para to the Therapeutic Learning Center at Pingree. And that I think we talked at that time how that model has been really effective. It's been really helpful for buildings to have that additional float ABA. So over the last year, we've been able to add float ABAs to a number of buildings through different means. Some buildings, it may be if a student had a one-to-one para and the student moved out of district, we shifted that position to become a float ABA. For other buildings, there was a request for a float ABA and we added that through the budget process. So we're at a point that the majority of our buildings have a float ABA, if not more. WEC reconfigured some of their programming. So they have 3 float ABAs. Recently, Chapman, we had talked about adding a float ABA and they were able to reconfigure some things. So they also have a float ABA and we have them in 4 of the primary schools at this point. So the ask is that we add 4 more float ABAs so that all of our primary schools would have a float ABA to support the varying needs. It allows us as students who are not on IEPs already, or maybe they're on an IEP for an unrelated disability, they're on for speech, and now we're seeing some challenges with behavior. It enables us to have some flexibility with support and providing that support more immediately as we're working through evaluations and figuring out long-term. So we would like to be able to have a float ABA in all of our primary schools. And then additionally, mid-year last year, we added those district RBTs. So RBTs are registered behavior technicians, and they have the same training as an ABA, but they have a certificate and they receive ongoing supervision from our BCBAs. That has been a game changer for us too. For the RBTs, they're really an extension of our BCBAs so that they can go out and help with assessments. They're doing data collection, they're doing observations. They meet with Christy all the time, and they're working through us to get kind of priority. If a principal raises the white flag that they need help, we're able to allocate them where we see the need and be very clear about their function. They're really coaching staff. They're helping to develop plans and helping the BCBAs with all of that work. So the BCBAs have also found them very helpful. They would love to have their own RBT for every BCBA, but the ask is really to add a 3rd one for next year. So on top of having an ABA in every building, we would also have those district RBTs that we could allocate as needed. So if a building needed to have 2 people, they would have 2 people or even 3, depending on the needs. We're really seeing, especially kind of kindergarten and 1st grade kids coming into the district or kind of trying to meet the needs of that primary school as a challenge. So we want to make sure we're kind of flooding with support if possible.
The transition time. Yeah. For those that don't know, the alphabet soup of special education, ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, BCBA is Board Certified Behavior Analysis, and RBT is Registered Behavior Technician. So BCBAs are, your higher level behaviorists, and then the Registered Behavior Technician, and then an ABA. Do we feel that we have enough BCBA support to those additional?
We do. So we still have the BCBA on as our long-term planning. I think the more immediate need that would be helpful for everyone is that district RBT, because again, it's an extension of the BCBA. I think the BCBAs really see the RBT as a help. It's not somebody else that they need to kind of supervise and look after. They're really able to support. So, if a BCBA is going out to the building for one student, we can send the RBT over there full-time or half days to be more intensive with that student, where BCBAs tend to do more of the kind of consultation and assessment. We're seeing the RBTs do the hands-on kind of direct coaching with the staff always under the supervision of the BCBA. So I do think, we've heard from the BCBAs, their caseloads are manageable. We always look year to year at all the needs across the buildings and make shifts with what we have. So certainly something I think we want to keep on our long-term planning for the district. But I think if there was something to prioritize for right now, those district RBTs are huge.
Would 1000% agree. The float ABAs, who supervises them?
So they still fall under this BCBA supervision because they're overseeing all the goals on the IEP. But there may also be students that haven't been identified yet, where the principal may just say, can you kind of go in that classroom like that? Things are really busy in there. Can you go in and be a help? And where they have that behavioral training, they can go in and provide a little more skilled support to the classroom that might just be struggling in the moment. So I think it allows a lot of flexibility with those float ABAs where we're not doing the direct day-to-day oversight. Really, the principals and the BCBAs are kind of working with them.
They're also really helpful with data collection. So if we're trying to determine, with the behavior intervention plan that was developed by the BCBA, that RBTs can really go in and ABAs can go in and really assess, like, are they making progress with this behavior plan? And then giving that direct feedback and data analysis back to the BCBA to determine, yes, it's effective, it's not effective, they need a different type of intervention. So and they can also graph the data. So that way it's not like before the IEP meeting it's being graphed weekly to be able to look at those trends in data.
How many schools does each BCBA have? Because I know we share.
So it depends. So we have 7 total BCBAs. So a lot of the schools have full-time BCBAs where that's their only school. And then we do have 2 that have 3 schools currently.
And how do we make the determination that one needs one and one does not? Or is that really driven from
The side of the
Okay.
We also look, and some of this is included in the BCBA's contract, looking at like historical data around how many FBAs, so that these are the assessments that they're doing. Looking at, so there might be one BCBA, say at West Augusta, where they have way more students, but because they're only in one building, that's more manageable because they're not traveling. So you might actually have another BCBA in multiple buildings. They have less students because they're traveling and managing that. So we consider all of that, like what are the programs, what are the caseloads, what are the travel time and things like that when considering that.
Would we ever consider having a district BCBA that we would do similar to the float ABAs or RBTs, that we would float to areas of the district that maybe can, be having behavior concerns?
We've thought about a lot of those.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a shift in our gen ed students who are coming in that, we see a lot of students coming in, for example, from ABA centers that never went to kindergarten, for example, and then they come into first grade and, the transition to public school can be really challenging. Yeah. So we are finding that the boots on the ground, so to speak, are so helpful for those students while we're trying to figure out that process and determine what level of need they require. Is it a higher ratio of support? Do they need to be in a different program? Like all those different factors. But the RBTs have been super helpful with going in, taking that data, coaching staff, developing visuals if needed, kind of setting them up for success so that we can determine, are they in the least restrictive setting and what level of support do they need? So we kind of we try to do that as much as we can so that we have a really informed plan going forward. And the BCBAs are always in constant contact with the RBTs around that. And so I think by adding another BCBA, of course, it'd be lovely, but I think as far as if you were to confer with a BCBA, I think the RBT's function of their extension is super helpful to them.
And I'm sorry if you've already said it's 2 district-wide.
Yeah. That's it, just
to the entire district.
Yes. So the rest are all full-time.
Yeah. Any other questions from the Katie? I'm sure I'll think of more.
It just to clarify, Meg did a great job explaining positions that we have here. She's also collaborated with as in our budget hearings with the positions that you see here as well.
Okay.
I want people to understand this document what it's been and what it will continue to be. You can look at the, in general, you can look at this as these positions here. These are part of our level service, right? We say compliance, but at the end of the day, level service is about maintaining what we have to support all of our students, right? And it happens to come onto this list because it's compliance, but this here is compliance, and it's part of level service. This number is really part of our strategic investment budget. So as you try to reconcile the detail of these positions to our three scenarios, these positions are in level service. If they're compliance, then they will likely be part of our 1% budget as well. And these positions are part of our strategic investment budget.
So if you don't mind, I'll go over the ones that on that first column too. So speech, and because feel free to chime in. We did kind of overstaff the speech department this year because we had a few maternity leaves anticipated. However, we are seeing, like, especially as we've added more classes for our communication enhancement program to Hamilton, the need for that ongoing position. So we've been funding that this year. So we want to get that into the budget for next year so that we still have that additional full-time speech pathologist to service our students.
So priority wise, that's compliance, so we don't have to worry. Is that right? So priority wise on your future, what would be your priority?
I would say the float ABAs for the buildings.
Okay.
And then the district RBT.
Okay. Go ahead, Ashley, you have a question?
Do you think adding those positions will help retain students? I guess like where my brain is at is like we always want to try to service our children where we live. And like looking at the other number that increased to the 3, it went from like the big jump when you guys were talking about Quincy. I guess where my brain is at is like, will adding those positions keep our students here, and will it help meet the needs of those students?
That's always our goal. And we believe so because we're being more proactive. When we have those float ABAs, it allows people to identify kind of a need and respond more quickly. It also allows for potentially the ABAs to go into classrooms and just provide general classroom suggestions around behavior management or setting up the environment. So you're going to ideally prevent some of those later behavior disruptions for kids that may be experiencing kind of sensory overload in the classroom. So it's more proactive in that sense. And it also, I think, we all know if there's teachers have a lot on their plates, there's a lot that they're responsible for. So if there's a student that's experiencing kind of big feelings and dysregulation, that can be very overwhelming and people want a fix quickly. So we might be more inclined to kind of put students in a more restrictive environment when people are overwhelmed than if we have that support to provide, we can kind of like take the temperature down of everything and hopefully identify the interventions within our schools that will really support the student long-term versus kind of a quick reaction to send them to an out of district when it's too challenging.
ABAs and RBTs have such a different view, and BCBAs for that matter, of a student. It's an expertise. It's something they just catch on. They're able to identify an antecedent to a behavior. That's huge. And if we can identify that early on, we're keeping the kid here, which is huge. Did you have any other questions, Ashley?
No.
Anybody else from the community? No. Oh.
And as Kim's coming up, these other positions, as primary schools come, they'll talk about these.
Yeah.
If there would be a request to add adjustment counselors, would that be on this budget or would that be on an individual school's budget?
So the adjustment counselors typically fall under the buildings.
Okay.
We don't allocate them at the district level.
Anybody else? No. Okay.
Thank you, Meg Christie. Now we're on to Lindsay.
Is there somebody in chat that wanted?
So, there's just a comment from Ben Crosby. Thank you for the comment, Ben. Appreciation presentation. And just talking about the equity around fees. So
Okay.
we've noted this, Ben. Thank you for the comment, Ben. Appreciate it.
Okay. If anybody has anything for Christy and Meg before they exit, if they are going to, please put it in the chat.
Yeah.
We're good. Make the
Support Lindsay. I don't think so. You should. It's getting Don't come down.
PD first, or what do you want?
Instruction is great.
Instruction is great.
The order I've got them in.
All right, that's it. Well said.
All right, so as we've discussed, the overall budget reflects a 1% increase. So I'm just going to talk about some of the notable changes. The first being the textbook line. You'll notice a $5,000 increase. That is to absorb the cost of Scholastic News for the elementary school, which is a resource they're using during that library 2 block. So that is part of the increase. And then just an update that ties into that line is on our math curriculum, possible change. The team we've put together is being very thoughtful and intentional, looking at data, getting feedback from teachers, exploring what the resource options are. So we don't have main resource identified yet that we will be changing to or using, but the cost would be comparable to the current contract of what the 1 year of Big Ideas would be.
And we're, if I jump in for a moment from a funding standpoint, we are probably our only real big capital ask this year will be, or free cash measure, will be around curriculum. So we'll be looking for roughly $120,000 to, it'll just help the operating budget. We've budgeted for what we just mentioned, but he looked as a one-time cost too. So we're going to seek capital funding for that. It just helps our budget. Thank you.
Can I rewind for a second? I'm sorry. You reminded me about the curriculum for the CEP. What's the
The stars? Yeah.
Heard there's been some struggles there with the curriculum. And does that falls under you guys' budget, correct?
We put some in our 240
Okay.
grant.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You were on that. And has that fully been implemented, or are we still waiting?
So I will say the STARS organization in general has been very slow to respond to different requests for PD. Notably this past Tuesday, we got the Zoom link at about 8:30 the morning of the PD. So they haven't been very responsive. I will say though, that feedback that I received from a couple of teachers are that now they have the overview of the actual media center, which houses all the curricula. We're very happy with it.
I heard very.
So I'm hoping that now that they've had a formal overview, they had the rest of the day yesterday to explore that and to apply that to their students to determine, lesson planning for the week. Anything that we have always introduced in special ed, because of the just general needs of the classroom, being able to oversee IEP goals and all those other things, we want to roll out slowly and intentionally and have everybody have time with it. To make good, feelings about it and feel like they're being supported. So we have rolled out the ABLES curriculum, the AFLs for the older student, and then the STARS curriculum and SOLAR, which is also the social pragmatic aspect of it. So there's a lot of changes. So we are being really slow and intentional with letting them experience those changes and then giving feedback. So the next several PDs are really designed to get their ABLES kits together and start doing some assessments. They're talking about how to divide those assessment tasks among their teams so that it's more of a multidisciplinary assessment for our CEP and Y students. And then as they're rolling it out with their just general curriculum planning, they now have this as a supplement or can use it entirely. So I'm really leaving it up to them, and then they'll give me feedback. But we'll do some check-ins after the next couple of weeks and when they've had a chance to really dive a little bit deeper.
And budget-wise, will that ever have to be absorbed into our budget?
It should be. So because of STAR's oversight or not oversight of the curricula so far, they've actually given us the media center for free this year.
Okay.
So, but it's not a huge line cost, and we did have some money allocated for a app that we had used to support the new IEP process, which had professional development as well as different ways to develop the IEP, like a tracker and different goal setting options, which has been a little lukewarm for a lot of our staff. So we do have that money set aside to reuse that, but we could just now apply it if we needed something. That's in the 240 grant.
And we do have some lines that we can pull from in terms of curriculum materials, visual media. So, and then we can kind of work again with the 240 grant if we need to shift some.
That's a huge priority. It's a huge priority for our CEP and our RISE students because I think the staff have really asked for that for some time. So I think we'll be in a good position.
Thank you. Sorry.
Not at all. It's all connected. So for professional development, again, the overall budget reflects a 1% increase in just some of the notable shifts you might notice. There's in contract services, there's a $4,000 change. So that line item reflects Alice training, our safety training with Navigate 360. And then we've shifted our evaluation training for administrators from Rebus Associates to an in-house model, which has been cost saving. And then that line item also leaves us a buffer for professional development speakers. We've created some really great relationships with Joe Rastusha, who does a lot of trauma training, and Katie Boucher, who works with neurodiversity. So we wanted to make sure we have funds allocated for that. And in the PD contract services, you'll notice we moved some of the money, and that's just to make sure we are providing staff trainings we need to, vector, safety care training, summer curriculum work.
Great. Any questions from the committee? The public? We're good.
Thanks, Lynn. I think we're on to some operations department. Ed Tech will be next meeting, the meeting after that. Food service is a self-sustaining fund through Universal Meals. So the two we're gonna talk about tonight is maintenance and transportation. Faith and Mike will be here and, start their work days. We didn't have them come here tonight. So Faith for transportation and Mike Manning, we've met with them. We had a hearing with them yesterday, and I'm just gonna touch on their budgets. So if we get to, we will start with transportation here. So for transportation, the biggest drivers are special ed transportation costs, our regular day. So we don't yet know what our students' contract will be for next year. We have some ideas and projections, which again, we use circuit breaker and our revolving fund to balance our operating budget. So as we go through the IFB process, we'll learn more. We're projecting, it could be, upwards of double digits, depending on who the contractor is. Getting information on districts that are selling with big yellow bus companies across the state. So that's one driver that we don't yet know the impact. We're projecting what the impact might be. And then, as I mentioned earlier, special ed transportation costs is driven by need and cost, and the IG's office is looking at, across the state, if there's procedures or things that can be done to rein in the cost. Here in Weymouth, we've done, I think, a great job. And do you want to touch on, Melissa, what we're doing now with special ed?
Well, we are quoting just to make sure that we're getting best price, and we have 7 vendors that we use. So we send a new request to 7 vendors and see who can provide services and at a fair rate.
So it's our contractors, it's our vendors we have on contract. And if a new route comes up, we don't just assign it. We say, give us your best quote. So it's our vendors that we already have on contract that we've already vetted, we're working with. And I'm gonna give us some kudos here. We started doing this year, and there was one route in particular that saved us thousands of dollars doing this new approach, so.
Do we ever share a route with another district?
Yes, all the time.
Okay.
We love to do that.
Yeah, there's a state website that looks at districts, looks at all the
Who's going where?
private schools, and you can
Okay.
connect with those, and Faith does a great job of that.
If you could be going through 4 different towns.
Sounds to
Yeah.
get through a
Yeah,
place, right?
yeah.
See a lot with the collabs.
And make staff though, too, when they place students, they'll ask, do you have
That
any
makes sense.
from sending town? Yes.
Any other questions?
I know we've talked about this in the past, so I just wanted to kind of touch on it. I think you probably know what I'm gonna say, the circuit breaker bill that's out there.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's still out there, right? And I don't know where it's at in its progress or process.
Yep.
I don't know if anybody else knows. I did follow it
Mhm.
on the government website, but yeah, we know that it's not like it's an unfunded mandate. We don't get fully reimbursed for it, but there is a bill out there to hopefully get fully reimbursed for circuit breaker at some point. So I would just ask, like, if people are following it and if there's anything we can do to advocate that for that, please let me know, let us know.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it is, we look at, so circuit breaker has helped a lot of districts in the past couple of years, because it's, you get the 75%, hopefully get the 75%. But there's been supplemental distributions to towns and cities. And so we base it, and we actually just, we dig deep into the circuit breaker numbers, and what the carry forwards are. And so we're basing it on that assumption of 75%. But if it comes to pass that goes through and it's 90% one time, that will help us to replenish some of those circuit breaker funds to address needs as they come up throughout the year. And then that's really what we're seeing, not just Weymouth, but when you talk about compliance, adding compliance positions, we're back to a time where you don't have the circuit breaker relief to absorb that, because basically you add a position during the year, the circuit breaker, and then you have to build in your operating budget the next year if it's still deemed compliance, but you're not getting reimbursed on the costs until the following year. So it is something that I think the legislators have identified, and so hopefully that goes through, and so it is on our list, but thank you for bringing it up. Yeah.
I did talk to Senator O'Connor's office yesterday, and they agree that the issue is in within circuit breaker in chapter 70, and I think anybody would agree.
Yeah.
That's the key, that's the issue.
And in terms staffing, no staffing requests, they come up as they're needed, when it comes to van monitors and drivers. So that's all I have for transportation.
So the parent reimbursement, well, the first one doubles, but then the McKinney-Vento drops. Is that forecast? Or like, what's the change? So one is McKinney-Vento is 10,000, but net proposed 3,000 next year. But then if you go to the other one, it's 7,000, and now we're projecting 15,000.
Yep.
Like, how did those numbers come about?
Student parents and
Yeah, there's
transportation.
parents that are providing transportation, which, I mean, we appreciate when they do that, and it saves us thousands.
But we
that
see
just
it
reimburse.
like doubling for next year for one, but McKinney-Vento dropping.
Dropping down, just based on the numbers of students and what we project that those that will be reimbursed, those that will be transporting themselves and will reimburse, so it's.
I didn't know if it was like aging out, or I don't know. I was trying- It just
enrollment.
it seems like a big jump both ways, so.
Yeah. I think they're independent of each other, but the fact that one's going up, one going down isn't the correlation. It's based on the numbers of students that we're projecting will utilize that. And McKinney-Vento is another a good point to bring up, that, we talk about unfunded state mandates. So we still have to take care and provide for our
Right.
students, whether it's DCF or McKinney-Vento. So we fit the bill, and we just hope we get some sort of reimbursement from the state.
You could budget 3,000 and you could.
It could end up tripling or something, yeah. That's why I was like, are we
Yeah.
lowballing when we should be putting?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, like, is that close to where we really think we're gonna
I
be?
think this is more realistic.
Okay,
Yeah, I think that this number,
Historical.
based on historical, I think more people might have been, coming out of the pandemic years, driving themselves. If they had access to the car, they may not have access to a car.
Right.
So I think this is
I
a
just want to make sure that there was enough in there.
calibration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? From the public?
Maintenance? Maintenance. And we focus on one area, that's utilities right now. I don't have to go into detail, anyone who pays utility bills at home. So, in terms of maintenance, we are to balance a budget with our utility costs, we're prioritizing, what we deem as our maintenance around the district. So we always focus on emergency, safety and security, maintenance and repairs, preventative maintenance, and then improvements last. So you're not gonna see a lot of improvements around probably for the next couple of years. But what you see is the focus on the other areas. And then in terms of positions, we're not looking to increase maintenance or custodial positions. We've actually cut funding for one of the maintenance positions that we talked about last time, and that allowed us to fund a position that came up this year for compliance. And then
We just didn't refill it, correct?
the,
Didn't somebody leave? Or-
Thank
or
you,
we-
yeah.
We just didn't fill an open position.
Thank you very much.
Plan on filling
Yeah.
it though.
Yeah, we don't, yeah.
We don't plan on.
Good
filling it.
clarification.
Yeah.
Is someone who left, we had struggled to fill a position. And so we're not funding the position. And so utilities, we're looking at, 5 to 7.5% maybe. We have to hone in that number, but that's based on, we also have some collaboratives that we go through with for not insurance, utility costs to kind of fix it. I think people who use direct energy at your own home, like there's ways to kind of mitigate that increase. And so we're looking at roughly a 5 and 7.5%. So where would that potentially come from? Again, we have revolving funds to supplement our operating budget. The Champions contract, we've been able to utilize that contract to pay for or supplement the utility costs for the spaces that Champions works in. And then food service, for our kitchens and cafeterias, we can do a square footage allocation and pull from those funds and transfer in costs for utilities. So this is still a work in progress, but we're fairly confident in this number right now.
Any questions for?
Mark, the second line item, the 3935, what is that for?
39, 30.
Yes, there's nothing.
It's part of this. So it's, yeah,
It's part of that.
we just, so these orgs expand out further.
Okay,
So it's just another line within this line. Good question.
Why isn't it just on that line?
Sorry, because I missed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
But it's probably like 10:07 and 10:10. I think there's an expanding number there.
thanks for the human element.
They have it.
If I can just say, I just want to shout out the maintenance guys, the way that they can fix our vehicles is pretty amazing. Knowing from the stories that I've heard, the way they turn it around and things that would in some cases be scrapped or like totaled, the way that revive them and they're working and is pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're lucky to have the trades that we have in-house here, whether it's mechanics,
Yeah.
electricians, plumbers, carpenters. I'll give you another example of the mechanics. We've been having a heck of a time with a generator at one of our buildings. And we've had the vendor come out countless times. And our mechanic went and took a look at it, and it was a dirty oil filter, and that was it. And so he's
And
able
the
to
vendor probably charged 3 times the amount.
luckily didn't, but they could
Thank
have.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's great to have those guys in house.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the committee? For the public? Yes, you're up quiet.
Waiting for the last one. So I think that's it for department and
Okay.
cost center for tonight.
Okay.
The last item we have is updates on our budget that we're at right now. Now and I touch on,
Can I read this before?
yeah,
You guys get it?
Yes,
I just-
absolutely.
I just want to remind the public and everybody that this affects everybody sitting at this table differently. It affects our children, our families, our friends, our colleagues. Let's be kind to people because we're making some very difficult decisions. And I just want to preface that this is really, really tough for everybody.
thank you. So as we look at our forecast here, our three budget scenarios, we did make an update. And as it was pointed out earlier, we're building three scenarios on the information we have right now. And we always strive for a level service budget. Based on the information we have now from the town, all town departments are working on a 1% budget. And then as the committee always done administration, we look at like what our strategic budget would be. I'll be honest, all indications tell us that we're gonna land likely closest to this budget, just what we're seeing. We always have a level service budget, but we did make an update. And again, we're projecting expenses, not really revenues yet. The governor's budget comes out in 2 weeks. We'll work with the town through the town's budget process to understand revenues as they look at assessments, and we look at Chapter 70 money and unrestricted aid coming to the town. But we just need to prepare that this 1% budget is as accurate as possible. That's what I mentioned earlier about looking realistically at projections, and we feel that this is our floor. Okay, that this is our floor. So to that end, we have changed our 2.9 shortfall because we're projecting expenses as compared to revenues. So our $2.9 million shortfall has now become a $3.8 million shortfall. And there's really two drivers of that. One is around $250,000. It's contractual obligations, and that's it's related to staff salaries. But the bigger driver of it is $650,000 is a number that we've chosen to identify as our potential compliance next year. We've looked at the last few years of compliance positions we've added. It's a silly exercise for us to come up with a budget knowing that we're going to add compliance positions next year. So we tried to project what that is. That number is $650,000. We've now baked that number into our level service number, which therefore increases the deficit or shortfall if we get 1%. So just to make it clear to everyone in the room that we have our three budget forecasts or our three budget scenarios. And from last time, we've updated this, share it with the committee. Like I said, the superintendent, she can touch on this. Certainly, we have meetings with the mayor's office. We just want people to be up to date on this number and what this number means.
And, Brian's focusing on that number, which I tend to want to say, what's the worst case scenario? And let's just understand what that is. And I want to be clear that it doesn't mean we're not advocating for everything else that we want, that we think we see as a need in our district, we see as a growth in our district. Because I think sometimes we're focusing in on this area because we've been asked to find a 1% budget at this point. But it does not mean that when we meet with the mayor every month that we're not advocating for our schools. But we also recognize that we are a part of the Weymouth family, Weymouth Police, Weymouth Fire, all of the departments. And so the way we work is we work as a team, right? So we will advocate as hard as we can for our kids, for our staff, but also recognizing that we're never going to pit against the police who help us every day or the fire who help us every day, that we are a part of that family and we have to do what we can. But you'll never see us pitting us against other departments, right? So because we recognize that is our role here. As we do the numbers, we're asked to find certain budgets, go through different exercises. We're walking you through the exercises that we're going through. As Danielle so nicely said, these are such difficult decisions and we're not even really deciding yet. We're just doing the maybe piece and maybe this and here's how we get there. But it starts to get super personal. And I say that because I don't where we don't pit against police and fire, I don't ever want to see us as a district start to pit ourselves against each other, like athletics versus band versus, AP versus middle school versus elementary, because we will get through this. Weymouth has unbelievable opportunities in our schools. And we will talk about those opportunities that we have in our schools. And will we have to step back for a couple of years? Absolutely. But we will have, the vision to get that back again. But we will get there. And I know we will get there. And I always believe we have to do it together. And we will do that with us here at the table, with you in the audience, with our union that we're working with the town hall that we're working with. We will do it together.
And as Mel mentioned, looking at the level service budget, that's really where we said, all right, we have known and projected costs, we have contractual obligations, we have utility costs increasing. So that's how we've come up with this level service budget. And again, to get to a 1% budget, this is what you would have to reduce that number. And so we're going to look at staffing and programs. So the conversation ends here tonight with this piece. And then in the coming meetings, we're going to talk more about specifics, whether it's cutting expenses or growing revenues. So the combination of cutting expenses, growing revenues, seeing what revenues will be from the state and the local will get us to a number somewhere between here.
I was waiting. You see the light bulb going off. The middle scenario shows an addition of 12.1 full-time.
Correct.
But the top scenario, and I hate to say it, is there a projection of the number that would be cut?
Not this time.
No,
It's too early.
not yet. No, so this number, I'm glad you asked, because we can bring this up next meeting.
Mhm.
This is the positions we've added
With
this
the,
year.
that we already added?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Added this year. And then projecting positions, that's where we added another 650 to this number,
Okay.
which makes this number worse, right?
Right. Yeah.
But that's a good
Okay.
question. So
So that's how it plays into, okay.
we'll prepare next time a schedule that shows the positions, Mary Ellen, that
Yep.
gets to these positions here. 'Cause I think it's important that we talk about that next month.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm down here. I know you
Yep,
can't really
good.
see me. Sorry. I just want to say thank you to Melanie because I know at the last meeting you talked about the small group with all the different stakeholders and keeping the vision of Weymouth Public Schools alive while also dealing with this. So I thought that was a 2 thumbs up. Kind of like not losing sight. That group will be a good reminder of kind of where we're at, but where we want to go and keeping the fiscal realities in lines with the goals of Weymouth Public Schools. So I think that was great. So thank you for doing that. And then I just also wanted to remind people that the governor's budget, when it does come out, is available publicly and they can read it. So last year, when I was new to this and I've been learning and we're always learning, I printed that out and I read some of it and it's really dry, but it's really informative and it may help people maybe even advocate at a higher level. Like when they read through that document, they have questions, maybe they want to send a email to, Governor Maura Healey or, reaching out to higher ups because, this is we talk about funding and looking at a long-term solution. We've got to go up and up and up until we can dig. And so all those good questions that people ask here, when they read that document, they might get an idea, they can reach out to higher ups.
Absolutely.
Did you want to just touch base that we're currently negotiating and what is planned to be negotiated too?
Meaning who we're negotiating with?
Like for union. So we're currently negotiating A, B, C, and D.
For next year.
For next year.
Contract.
Not B. So
Yeah.
A, D, C. Is anybody scheduled for 27 too?
yeah, so up in August 31st, Unit A, Unit C, Unit D expire. Unit B
Okay.
has 1 more year.
Okay.
That's the WEA units. We're also looking at some tech positions that will come in WEA.
Right.
Traffic supervisors are up now. And then our SEIU units, food service has a contract, but we're also be negotiating maintenance, custodial, and van drivers. So we're negotiating 7 of our 9 bargaining units right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're waiting for the SEIUs to, that'll start in the spring sometime probably,
Okay.
but yes, that's a good point. We have 7 of 9 bargaining units up.
Okay. Any other questions, Brian? You excited? We'll open it up to the public. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay, no, for them. No.
Great information, as always. Thanks for the updates on those 3 budget scenarios. Just some comments. Well, I think it's commendable to hear that, you know, we don't want to pit against other departments in town. That's not, you know, that won't be your decision. Your role will be to advocate, present the case. These are the things we're not going to be able to do. These are the increasing deficits. These are the increasing negative impacts to schools. This is how we're not going to improve academic outcomes from where we are, which is in a terrible spot. All of those things, I'm assuming you will be educating town hall on. They need a big level of education around the reality of the state of affairs in Weymouth Public Schools and what the impact of a 1% budget is going to be in fiscal year 27. That was made clear from the commentary that we heard last year at the council's budget committee, where we had councilors basically say things are great in Weymouth Public Schools and the problems exist here but not there. I'm not sure what data they're looking at, but it was obvious that they need a high level of education and information sharing about communicating the true reality of what is happening in Weymouth Public Schools and how much the damage is going to be significantly increased as a result of a 1% budget. In my view, having followed this for a dozen years, this budget, if it remains at 1%, this is going to undo all of the progress that's been made since 2008, since fiscal year 08, 9, 10, 11, 12. These kinds of cuts and the resulting staff reductions, I'll have a question about that in a second. This budget is going to undo all of the progress that's been made. And I'm confident that when you do have those weekly or monthly conversations with your colleagues on the town hall side, that is being effectively communicated. But I would also ask the public now engage going forward to continue with that education as well. In terms of the one, and again, some of this commentary is for town hall, but I'm going to put it here in terms of context. A 4.25% budget cut, which is what we're talking about in a 1% budget for fiscal year 27 schools, doesn't have the same impact across the board. A 1% increase across the board is going to have a much bigger impact on a $103 million budget or a $91 million appropriation than it would on another department's 50 million or 60 million or 20 million. So for the town to just take an equity slice and say, we're just going to do 1% across the board is not going to cut it in fiscal year 27. Schools are the largest department. They're the most impactful department. They're the highest need department in terms of staffing, building requirements, all of that. And so if tough decisions need to be made around pulling from other department budgets to further supplement the budget for the schools in FY27, then that needs to happen on the town hall side. And I would suggest that administrators on the school side and school committee members need to effectively and regularly communicate that to town hall and at every public meeting going forward. Because it can't just be the same across the board. We've heard in the past that the fiscal year 26 budget, the 25 budget was to the bone. That means that you're not going to have options for cost or expense reductions in a lot of other places, programmatically, infrastructure things. It's going to be staffing. And I think people need to understand that. And as I mentioned at the last budget subcommittee meeting, if you just simply take a look at your $4 million shortfall, and again, this isn't reality, but if you simply look at $100,000 salary, that's 40 positions. And obviously the number is going to be higher because you're not going to just eliminate $100,000 positions. You've got people at 37, at 45, at 52, at 63, at 75, at 82,000. So that number is going to be significantly large. I'm sure you're already looking at it, and I know come February 4th, we're going to be having a formal presentation about that, but that information needs to be made available also, that we're going to be seeing staff cuts that are going to bring us back to the 2008, 2009, 2010 timeline. And if I may then, having said that, I know I sent you this and it's that time of the year. Danielle, can I just give these out? These are the printouts of the, as you know, I've been for the last dozen years taking a look at Chapter 70 funding in Weymouth and been taking a look at the data and creating some reporting slides around our history around Chapter 70 net school spending as a town. The bottom line remains the same. Weymouth lags the state averages on a net school spending basis by significant amounts. Fiscal year 24, which was the last one that's been closed out by DESE, we trailed the state by 14%. And while we do need to give credit to the town administration, at least prior town administration, for the fact that school funding on a not just on a net basis, but on a net school spending basis has in fact increased, we have failed to make up the gaps since fiscal year 2008 in terms of how we compare Weymouth to what the rest of the Commonwealth is doing. On a net school spending basis, ranking the municipalities from highest spending to lowest spending of the 351 communities across the state, Weymouth has never broken the 12th percentile when it comes to spending on schools on a net school spending basis. That means that 88% of the rest of the communities in the Commonwealth have figured out how to invest more money in their schools than the town of Weymouth has done over the last dozen years. If you take a look at it even more impactfully on a per pupil basis, the last number that was available, we lagged the state averages on that one also going back to fiscal 08 and prior. And fiscal year 23, the last numbers that are formally closed out and available from DESE, we trail the state average by $2,086. 6,000 students in Weymouth, that's $1.2 million that should be made readily available in an additional school investment for schools to make up those gaps. And I could talk more about the data, but in the interest of time and just in terms of providing some highlights about what's been going on, I'll close by just pointing out that, yes, state investment on a net school spending basis also decreased across the board if you take a look at the slides, but so did Weymouth. So we continue to mirror the gap that's existed for a long time in terms of the amount that Weymouth is investing in public schools. That needs to change. And I know that that's not a message necessarily directed at all of you, because we are a dependent school district. So we are entirely dependent for the most part on the appropriation piece and the amount of state aid that we get in terms of funding for our schools. But I implore you and I encourage you to, at every opportunity, whether it's school committee members or administration, at meetings and conversations, to communicate these facts to town halls, to the new town councilors in particular, who may be completely oblivious to this history and the realities of what's taking place right now. Thank you.
And thanks for sharing the article. We did talk the other day, Mayor's up, about in particular the article that was in the Ledger around Gateway City. It is interesting that when we did the analysis of, there's like roughly 26 cities, towns that have that designation. It came about 15 years ago. It was like the gateway to the American dream, this whole concept. I won't bore you with the details of it, but bottom line is that it sounds like Weymouth is now part of that designation, which could increase funding for education, infrastructure, housing, those things. It's on their radar, and they're going to talk to people at the state level to see what this actually means, if it does mean more funding or not.
Got pros and cons.
Right. Can I, Jenna? Thank you, Brian, for highlighting that. I know I did send you that piece. The question that needs to be asked is, how is it the town leadership was not on top of this? It was a surprise article in Commonwealth Beacon that did a lot of research on it, and they determined that, gee, by the way, Weymouth and a couple of other towns, based on the current definition, not the bill that was introduced by another state rep to expand the definition for qualification of the gateway city, but under the current definitions, it appears that Weymouth should have been receiving these additional funds for several years. And I think the question that needs to be asked is, why was this not here, but why was this a surprise to town leadership? I'm glad to hear that they're taking a look at it. It is unlikely that, given the political dynamics that exist on Beacon Hill, and as the article points out, there's some challenges in terms of the leadership on Beacon Hill, that anything is going to necessarily happen in the short term. But I'm glad to hear that at least they're taking a look at it, because even if it isn't direct education dollars, usually it's a lot for developmental support and infrastructure support. That means that, you know, the opportunity cost of that money means that if you get additional funds there, that might free up additional funds for the town to increase the funding of the school budget. Thanks.
Anybody else from the public?
I don't think anyone,
No.
you know, on here is just Ben's comment. That's it.
Okay,
There's some.
that's just.
That's previous, that's-
Yeah.
Ben's comment, yeah.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
A second emotion.
We are adjourned. Our next meeting is next Wednesday. So I will see you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.